3 seconds. That's how long Sophie Cunningham stared at Kelsey Mitchell before the entire Fever locker room realized something inside this team had just snapped in half. No yelling, no cameras rolling, just a silence so loud that 2 staffers later admitted they didn't know whether to leave the room or pretend they hadn't seen it. And right in the middle of that frozen moment sat the one chair nobody was looking at, Caitlin Clark's. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what Sophie said, why Mitchell's hot mic moment didn't actually start with a microphone, and the one detail about Caitlin Clark that nobody covering this story is reporting yet. And before I go further, I want to make a prediction. By the time this video ends, I'll tell you who I believe will be wearing a Fever jersey next season and who won't. Drop your guess in the comments right now. Half of you are about to be very wrong. Picture the scene. Post-game, lights still buzzing, ice bags melting on the floor. Mitchell had just delivered another stat line that should have owned the headlines, and instead the post-game chatter, the questions from reporters, the social clips already circulating, were all orbiting Clark. Again, Mitchell sat down, pulled her hood up, and muttered something just loud enough for the wrong ears. Cunningham heard it. Cunningham processed it. And Cunningham, who has never been mistaken for a quiet personality in this league, did the one thing nobody expected. She walked over. She didn't shout. She didn't escalate. She said one sentence, calm, surgical, devastating, and the temperature in that room dropped 15 degrees. Here's the part most fans are missing. This wasn't about one game. This was about 18 months of pressure compressing inside one franchise until the seams couldn't hold. Think about what Indiana has absorbed since 2024. The largest rookie-driven attendance spike in league history. National broadcasts arriving in a city that hadn't hosted them in years. Sold-out road arenas. Merchandise selling faster than the team could restock. And inside all of that, one player became a brand, while another player carried the wins. Not only did Mitchell post a career-high 20.2 points per game in 2025 and earn her first All-WNBA first-team nod, but she did while playing all 44 regular season games and all 8 playoff games as the offensive engine after Clark's groin injury. Game over. And yet, the camera still framed every Mitchell highlight as a chapter in Clark's story. Every close-up, every post-game question, every B-roll cutaway. Clark, 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 even when Clark was in street clothes on the bench. That is the kind of imbalance that doesn't show up in a box score. It shows up in body language. It shows up in a half-second pause before a teammate passes the ball. It shows up, eventually, in a locker room. So was Mitchell's hot mic moment really an accident? Or was it the quietest cry for credit this league has heard in a decade? Because here's what we actually know. The words weren't aggressive. They weren't aimed at Clark personally. They were aimed at the structure, the system, the spotlight, the unspoken hierarchy that asks one player to carry the team while another player carries a franchise. Mitchell didn't break a rule. She broke a silence. And there's a difference. What makes this moment so combustible isn't the words themselves. It's the timing. Indiana is heading into a contract window that would define the next 5 years of this franchise. Clark's 4th-year option has already been exercised. Mitchell's situation is more delicate, more leveraged, more public. Front offices around the league are watching. Agents are circling. And the question every executive in the WNBA is quietly asking right now is the same one fans are about to ask out loud. Can these two coexist, or is Indiana already past the point where a choice has to be made? Cunningham, for her part, didn't pick this fight. She inherited it. She walked into a locker room that had already chosen sides before she ever opened her mouth. And what she said next, the actual sentence, the one that's been whispered about but never reported in full, is where this story stops being about basketball and starts being about loyalty, leverage, and the kind of betrayal that doesn't happen on the court. And what Sophie said next wasn't even the loudest part of the room. Rewind 7 years. Same arena, same hardwood, empty seats in entire upper sections. A scoreboard operator running the clock for crowds, so small you could hear individual conversations from the 3rd row. That was Kelsey Mitchell's Indiana. No viral clips. No national pregame shows rolling into town. No sneaker deal pulling up in a wrapped SUV outside the practice facility. Just Mitchell a roster in transition, and a job that paid in bruises and box scores nobody read. She showed up anyway, every night, every season, every losing streak that felt like it would never end. And here's the part that hurts when you actually sit with it. Those years built her, but they also buried her. The league moved on. New stars arrived. New storylines crowded the headlines. And by the time Indiana finally became relevant again, the spotlight that lit up the arena wasn't pointed at the woman who'd been there the whole time. It was pointed at the rookie sitting next to her. Mitchell didn't complain. She didn't tweet. She didn't leak. She just kept working, kept scoring, kept being the player coaches trust when the game gets ugly in the fourth quarter. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Every franchise eventually learns. Every team built around one rookie phenomenon eventually fractures. And the data backs it up. League analysts have pointed out for years that when a franchise reshapes its identity around a single incoming star, the veterans who carried the rebuild experience what one former WNBA front office executive paraphrased bluntly. You don't lose a locker room when the star arrives. You lose it 18 months later, when the veterans realized the spotlight was never going to rotate. That's not bitterness talking. That's pattern recognition. Not only does it happen across the WNBA, but it's also happened in the NBA and the NFL, and in nearly every professional league where one player becomes bigger than the franchise itself. Same script, different jerseys. Picture the night against Las Vegas. Playoff stakes. Indiana's season hanging by a thread. Clark in street clothes on the bench, watching. Mitchell drops 34 points. 34. In a single elimination atmosphere against one of the most decorated defensive units in the league. That's not a stat padding night. That's a franchise-saving night. That's a legacy night. And what did the broadcast lead with after the final buzzer? A cutaway to Clark's reaction. A graphic about Clark's recovery timeline. A panel discussion about what this one meant for Clark's eventual return. Mitchell got a sideline interview that lasted under 90 seconds. Now think about what that does to a competitor's mind over the course of a season. Not one night, a season. Every single time she delivered, the camera drifted somewhere else. Every single time she carried the offense, the headline carried someone else's name. Mitchell never said a word publicly, and that's the part that should tell you everything. Because silence in a competitor's vocabulary isn't peace. It's storage. It's a competitor cataloging every slight, every overlooked moment, every post-game question that started with, and how do you think Caitlin would have? Instead of what you just did was extraordinary. And here's the dual reality that makes this moment so volatile. Mitchell isn't asking to be the face of the franchise. She's asking to not be invisible inside her own building. Those are two very different requests. One is ego, the other is dignity. And if you can't tell which one Mitchell is making, you haven't been paying attention to how she's carried herself for the last 7 years. Which brings us back to Cunningham. Because what most fans don't realize is that Sophie has been watching this imbalance for far longer than anyone thinks. She's not a newcomer to the dynamic. She's been in the locker room. She's been on the bus. She's been in the film sessions. She's seen the way Mitchell's name disappears from broadcasts, even on nights Mitchell wins a game. And Cunningham, for all the noise that surrounds her public persona, is not actually impulsive when it comes to teammates. She watches. She calculates. She decides. And she had already decided whose side she was on long before that post-game moment ever happened. The question isn't if Cunningham was going to say something. The question is, what made that specific night the night she finally said it? Because whatever Mitchell muttered under her hood, whatever the hot mic caught, whatever the cameras missed, Cunningham didn't react to it. She answered it. And the answer she gave is about to change everything. Here's the surprising truth about Sophie Cunningham that most fans completely misread. The enforcer labels sells jerseys and racks up viral clips, but it doesn't actually describe who she is inside a locker room. Cunningham isn't the player who picks fights. She's the player who finishes them. There's a difference, and that difference is the entire reason this story matters. The fans who think she rode in as Caitlin Clark's personal bodyguard are missing the deeper read. Cunningham doesn't protect Clark because Clark is the star. She protects Clark because Clark is a teammate. And in Cunningham's code, those are not the same thing. Watch the way she's operated since arriving in Indiana. She's been physical with opponents who cross lines. Yes. She's been vocal in post-game interviews. Yes. But she's also been remarkably restrained inside her own locker room. She doesn't lobby for touches. She doesn't campaign on social media. She doesn't drop subtle quotes designed to be screenshot. She does her job. She defends her teammates publicly, and she keeps the internal stuff internal. That last part is the most important one, because when Cunningham finally did speak up inside the room, it wasn't a tantrum. It was a verdict, and verdicts in a locker room carry weight that hot mics never will. Mid-CTA, if the way this dynamic has been quietly building inside Indiana surprised you, you already know why hitting that subscribe button matters. There's more breakdown like this coming on the Clark-Mitchell-Cunningham triangle, the Fever's off-season chess game, and the trade conversations nobody is reporting yet. And you don't want to miss what drops next. So what does a teammate actually say when she believes another teammate is being undermined? Not attacked, not benched, undermined, quietly, structurally, from inside the building. Here's a quick scene that captures it. A former WNBA guard once described a similar locker room moment from her own career, a veteran muttering frustration about a rising rookie, a hot mic, a silence, and then one player standing up and saying, "If you've got something to say it to her face, not to the room." The mutterer didn't respond. She didn't have to. The room had already shifted. That's the texture of these moments. They aren't loud. They're surgical. And the player who delivers a line doesn't win an argument. She redraws the map of who trusts who. That's what Cunningham did. That's the part nobody has fully reported. She didn't yell. She didn't escalate. She delivered a sentence that essentially said, if this team has a problem, the problem doesn't get whispered, it gets named. And the second she said it, every player in that room had to make a silent decision. Side with Mitchell's frustration, which was legitimate but expressed in the worst possible way. Or side with Cunningham's standard, which protected Clark without dismissing Mitchell. There was no neutral ground. There rarely is in moments like this. Now here's where the story takes the turn that the major outlets haven't touched yet. Because the assumption everyone has made is that Clark was in the room when it happened, that she was in the trainer's area, that she missed it, that she found out secondhand the next day. Sources inside the building tell a different version. The version where Clark was closer than anyone realized. The version where she heard every word. Mitchell's mutter, Cunningham's response, the silence in between, and didn't move a single muscle. No reaction, no comment, no glance up from her phone. Just stillness. And that stillness is what shocked the staff more than anything else that night. Because Clark is competitive. Clark is emotional. Clark is the kind of player who reacts visibly to a missed defensive rotation in the third quarter of a regular season game in June. For that player to hear that exchange and show nothing, it told the people in the room something they're still processing. Either Clark already knew this was coming, or Clark had already decided how she was going to respond. There's no third option, and neither one of those options is small. The Fever's coaching staff reportedly held an internal meeting within 48 hours. Nothing leaked publicly. Nothing showed up on the injury report or the practice schedule. But the body language at the next shoot-around told its own story. Spaced-out drills, quieter huddles, fewer of the casual sideline conversations that usually fill the gaps between reps. Something had shifted. Everyone could feel it. Nobody was going to say it. Because the decision Indiana has to make next isn't about basketball anymore. Picture Caitlin Clark in the tunnel that night. Hoodie up, headphones in, but not playing anything. Phone in her hand, but the screen dark. Staffers walking past her without making eye contact because they didn't know what her face was going to do. She's not crying. She's not fuming. She's calculating. And for anyone who has watched Clark closely since her Iowa days, that specific stillness is the most dangerous version of her. The version that doesn't react in the moment because she's already 3 moves ahead of the conversation everyone else is still having. Remember earlier when I said Clark heard every word? Here's the twist. She didn't just hear it that night. She'd been hearing versions of it for months. That's the part the public narrative keeps getting wrong. Clark is portrayed as a wide-eyed phenomenon who has no idea how the politics of a locker room actually work. and that portrayal is convenient, marketable, and almost completely false. She came from a college program where she was a face, the offense, the brand, and the lightning rod simultaneously. She knows what it feels like to be both the reason a team wins and the reason a team's veterans get overlooked. She's lived this dynamic before. She just hasn't lived it in a professional locker room until now. And the rules are different here. Slower, quieter, more permanent. Here's the commonly overlooked mistake every young superstar makes when the hierarchy of their team shifts beneath them. They try to fix it with effort. They show up earlier. They stay later. They pass more. They defer more. They believe sincerely that if they just play harder and credit their teammates more in post-game interviews, the tension will dissolve on its own. It almost never does, because the tension isn't about effort. It's about attention. And no amount of extra reps in an empty gym can redistribute the cameras outside it. That's the trap. And every league watching the WNBA's current growth curve is about to learn the same lesson, because this isn't a one-franchise problem anymore. The emerging trend across women's basketball is that incoming superstar rookies are now bringing media ecosystems with them that completely dwarf the franchises they're joining. Indiana is just the first lab. Other teams are next. And how the Fever handle this exact moment is going to become the template or the cautionary tale for every front office in the league. So what does a player like Clark actually do in a situation like this? Here's where the underreported part gets interesting. Sources around the team describe Clark as having been unusually present in non-basketball settings over the last several weeks, showing up to optional film sessions she didn't need to attend, sitting next to different teammates on the team plane, asking veterans questions that had nothing to do with X's and O's and everything to do with how they had handled franchise transitions earlier in their careers. That's not the behavior of a player who is oblivious to the room. That's the behavior of a player who is quietly building a coalition, one conversation at a time. And here's the bonus insight most fans haven't been told. The front office conversation about how to balance Clark and Mitchell long-term didn't start this month. It didn't start after the hot mic moment. It started in October. Quiet meetings, closed-door discussions about contract structures, marketing splits, role definitions, and what a two-star backcourt actually looks like when one of the stars sells out arenas and the other one earns all WNBA first-team honors. The Fever's leadership has known this collision was coming. They just hoped it would arrive on their timeline, not Mitchell's and not Cunningham's. That's why the stillness in the tunnel matters so much. Clark wasn't shocked because Clark wasn't surprised. She'd been briefed, formally or informally, that this conversation was coming. She'd had time to think about what kind of teammate, what kind of leader. Here's a surprising insight that gets lost in every hot take segment about this story. The Fever cannot keep both stars happy without restructuring almost everything that currently defines this franchise: the offensive system, the touch distribution, the marketing dollars, the contract architecture, and the very identity the team has been selling since Clark arrived. That's not pessimism. That's basketball arithmetic. There are only so many possessions in a game, only so many fourth-quarter touches, only so many magazine covers, only so many sideline interviews that lead to broadcast. And when one player generates the cultural gravity and another player generates the statistical production, the franchise has to decide which currency it's actually paying its stars in. Most teams discover too late that they were paying in the wrong one. Look at what Indiana is actually weighing right now. A coaching staff that has to draw up a system honoring both a primary ball handler in Clark and a primary scorer in Mitchell. A front office negotiating contract leverage in a league where the new CBA is reshaping every salary conversation in real time. A marketing department that built an entire brand identity around Clark while quietly hoping Mitchell's all-WNBA first-team season would be enough recognition to keep her satisfied. It wasn't, and the hot mic moment proved it. The question now isn't whether the Fever can solve this. It's whether they can solve it before another franchise offers Mitchell a clear role and a louder microphone. So is Mitchell actually asking for a trade, or is she asking for respect? Because the difference between those two requests is the entire future of this team. A trade request is a closed door. A respect request is an open invitation, a chance for a franchise to course correct before the player stops believing the course can be corrected. Not only do league insiders believe Mitchell is firmly in the second category right now, but they also believe the window for Indiana to act on it is measured in weeks, not months. Game over. And here's the dual reality that makes this so urgent. Mitchell's market value has never been higher, which means her leverage has never been stronger. And the longer Indiana waits to address it, the more expensive the eventual solution becomes. Whether that solution is a new contract, a restructured role, or a phone call from a rival GM. Which brings us back to the promise I made at the start of this video. The prediction. Here it is. I believe Kelsey Mitchell will still be wearing a Fever jersey next season, but only because Indiana's front office is about to make a series of quiet, expensive, structural concessions that fans won't fully appreciate until 2 years from now. Cunningham stays because her presence is a glue this locker room can't afford to lose. And Clark, for all the noise around her, will spend this offseason doing exactly what she did in that tunnel, saying very little, watching very carefully, and building a version of leadership that doesn't require her to be the loudest voice in the room, to be the most important one in it. If you guessed differently in the comments, don't delete your prediction. Come back and tell me what I got wrong. Because when you zoom out on this entire saga, 3 threads are quietly braided together. Cunningham's loyalty wasn't about defending a star. It was about defending a standard. Mitchell's frustration wasn't about ego. It was about 7 years of being the quiet engine of a franchise that finally found its volume but pointed it elsewhere. And Clark's silence wasn't avoidance. It was the most calculated act of leadership a second-year player has shown in this league in a long time. 3 players, 3 truths, 1 locker room, and a front office that's about to learn whether it has the imagination to hold all 3 together, or whether it'll be remembered as a team that had everything and chose to keep only part of it. There's one question left that nobody is asking out loud yet, and I'll be answering it in the next video. What happens to the rest of this roster when the spotlight finally finishes its argument with itself? Because there are players on this team whose futures hinge entirely on which version of the Fever wins this internal debate, and most of them haven't been mentioned in a single national broadcast all season. That story is coming next, and the names involved are going to surprise you. For now, just remember this. The loudest moment in that locker room wasn't a shout. It was a stare, 3 seconds long, and the silence that followed it is still echoing through every conversation Indiana is about to have. This video is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It is not professional financial, medical, or legal advice. Always consult a qualified expert before making any decisions. 3 seconds. That's how long Sophie Cunningham stared at Kelsey Mitchell before the entire Fever locker room realized something inside this team had just snapped in half. No yelling, no cameras rolling, just a silence so loud that 2 staffers later admitted